Under the sinking sun, the desert bled gold and rust. The wind wandered slow through the bones of cactus and sage, whispering old names long forgotten. From that far, empty horizon came Iona Redbird, aged 20, her boots worn thin, her heart even thinner. The bundle in her arms held all that was left of her parents, 2 small carvings and a strip of faded cloth. They had passed with the last winter frost, leaving her to wander the land that no longer called her daughter. The dust followed her like a shadow that wouldn't let go. She had walked all morning and now, at the edge of Red Mesa town, her breath caught like a broken note. All she wanted was work. Yet she could already feel the town's eyes pressing against her skin, judging, measuring, denying. Somewhere beyond the saloon and blacksmith shop, a tall figure watched her move through the haze, his silhouette carved in the same stubborn light. The door to the ranch cookhouse creaked as she entered. The smell of lard and beans hung thick, and a woman with flour on her hands turned to stare. "We don't take on strangers," she said, her voice like gravel in a tin cup. "Especially not." She stopped, the word dying on her tongue but lingering in the air. Iona swallowed, lowered her gaze, and spoke softly. "I can clean, mend clothes, tend to horses. I just need work." Her voice trembled only once. Before the woman could reply, heavy boots stepped onto the porch. The sound filled the room like thunder before rain. Silas Boone, age 30, stood framed by the doorway, tall as the doorframe itself, his shadow stretching across the wooden floor. His hat brim hid eyes pale as desert sky. "Let her speak," he said. The cook, Martha Greaves, age 45, shifted uneasily. "Silas, you can't." He didn't answer her, only looked at Iona. Something in his gaze held steady, unafraid of the silence between them. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Iona Redbird." The name floated through the air like smoke from a sacred fire. He nodded once. "You'll find work here. Martha'll show you the chores." And just like that, the door to her new life cracked open, letting in a breath of something she hadn't felt in months: possibility. 4 days, she worked in near silence. The ranch creaked and groaned with men's laughter and the clatter of horseshoes, but Iona stayed near the edges, sweeping dust that never truly left the floorboards. The men passed by her with the wary glances of those unsure whether to scorn or pity. At sunrise, she carried water to the corral, her hair braided back with a strand of her mother's cloth. And every morning, Silas Boone watched from a distance, one hand resting on the fence, the other shading his eyes. He never spoke much, just nodded when their gazes met. Yet in that nod was an understanding deeper than words. 2 people carrying ghosts heavier than saddlebags. She learned that Silas had once been a drifter, then a rancher. That he had buried a wife and child during a fever that swept through the valley. Since then, he worked the land like penance. The townsfolk called him the Giant of Coyote Ridge, but his loneliness stood taller than his frame. She wondered if he saw in her reflection a fragment of the life he lost. He wondered if she might remind him that forgiveness could bloom again in dry soil. Evenings brought whispers. Men at the saloon said the ranch was cursed now, harboring a native girl under its roof. The sheriff, Clay Harlow, age 50, rode up one afternoon, his badge gleaming like accusation. He leaned against his horse and said to Silas, "You'll lose help if you keep her. Folks don't take kindly to it." Silas's jaw tightened. "Then I'll lose them." The sheriff's mouth twitched into something between a smirk and a threat. "You always did choose your battles poorly." He rode off, dust swallowing him whole. That night, Iona sat by the small fire behind the stables, her hands raw from scrubbing. She heard footsteps and looked up. Silas stood there, holding something behind his back. When he handed it to her, she saw it was a shawl, rough wool, stitched unevenly. "For the cold," he said, and turned away before she could thank him. The gesture warmed her more than the flames. She wrapped it around her shoulders, closing her eyes as the scent of cedar and smoke settled over her. But kindness in harsh lands draws eyes sharper than knives. A week later, at dawn, she found the barn defaced, ugly words smeared across its walls, paint dripping like blood. She fell to her knees, trembling, then grabbed a bucket and began to scrub. Her tears mixed with the water, her body shaking as she erased each letter of hate. When Silas found her, the sun was just breaking over the ridge. He said nothing. Instead, he knelt beside her and took up a rag. Their hands met briefly in the water, rough skin against rough skin, and for a moment they were no longer two outcasts but a single will refusing to break. Together they washed until the boards gleamed again, until the sunrise turned the wet wood to gold. The days that followed felt gentler somehow, though danger still hung in the air like smoke before fire. Silas began showing her the land, how to calm a frightened colt, how to read the clouds for rain. She spoke little, but her silence carried music. Once, while mending a fence, he said, "You hum when you work." She looked up, shyly smiling. "My mother said songs keep the earth awake." He studied her face as if learning the shape of peace for the first time. The rains came without warning. That afternoon, the sky cracked open with thunder, and the earth turned slick with mud. Ayanna was near the corral when one of the horses panicked, breaking free. It bolted toward the canyon edge, hooves splashing through the downpour. Without thought, she ran after it, shouting into the wind. The ground gave way beneath her. She slipped, her scream swallowed by thunder. Then a hand, strong, sure, caught her arm. Silas pulled her back just as the earth crumbled into the ravine. For a moment, they stood there, chests heaving, rain pouring over them like baptism. "You could have died," he said, voice raw. "So could you," she replied. The storm raged around them, lightning turning the world white. He looked at her, eyes full of something fierce and desperate, something he'd buried too long. "Ayanna," he whispered, "I have chosen you as my wife." Her breath caught. The words hung between them, trembling with the weight of everything unspoken. "You don't know what they'll say." "I know what I'll say," he answered softly. "That I've lived half my life without reason. That I won't spend the rest of it denying what's been given back to me." She searched his face through the rain, saw grief, saw strength, saw the wild courage that only love could summon. Slowly, she nodded. And in that nod, something shifted in the world. They were married a week later beneath the lone cottonwood near the ridge. No preacher came. The wind itself served as witness. Martha brought bread, blessing them with awkward affection. The sheriff stayed away. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing like a hymn. Silas tied a thin red ribbon into Ayanna's hair, the color of new beginnings. "My mother used to say red means the heart remembers," she whispered. "Then let it remember this," he replied. Their vows were quiet, sealed not by words but by a shared look that said we survived. The months that followed were not without struggle. Some townsfolk refused to sell to them. Others came around slowly, drawn by Silas's steady decency and Ayanna's calm grace. The ranch grew green again under her care. Flowers sprouted near the stables where only dust had lived before. Children began to wave when she passed. The cruel talk dwindled into silence. Time, like water, wore even the hardest stones smooth. One evening, years later, Ayanna stood beside Silas on the porch as the sun sank behind the mesa. The air smelled of sage and rain remembered. She laid her head against his arm, and for the first time in her life, she felt entirely seen, not as a stranger, not as pity, but as a story completed. The desert stretched before them, endless and kind. Travelers who pass through Red Mesa still speak of them. The giant cowboy and the native woman who turned a place of dust into a home. Some say the earth blooms brighter where they once stood. Others swear they've heard laughter riding the wind at sunset. And if you listen closely, when the world grows still enough, you might hear her voice carried over the ridges. Do not wait for others to tell you your worth. Find the one who sees it before you speak. For love, like rain in the desert, comes only to those who keep walking. And with that whisper, the wind moves on, carrying their story like dust that remembers everything it ever touched.